so unfortunately he cannot join us.
And then I know a few people have got to leave early, so some people are 2, some people are 3. Yeah, so I'm going to try and get through the agenda as quickly as I can, but making sure we do justice to the items, of course. But I'm accepting that some people have got to step away. So, without further ado, any other apologies or welcomes that we'd like to make? I think so. Okay. Minutes of the 6th of July. Those minutes have been circulated. So, is there any points that anybody would like to make on those points of clarity or observations? No? Okay, thanks very much. And so the actions are rising. I wonder if you could pull those up for me, Rob. I think there wasn't a great deal.
Do you want me to just...
Yeah.
So if we just go... Yep.
Okay, so the first one was around the Outcomes, Performance and Quality Committee paper. So, Shane, I don't know whether you want to update on that. I know Deb's team gave an update to the NEDs on the progress of the paper, which was really good. I suppose there's a question on there about operationalising that and what stage that's at, Deb. So I don't know whether you can update us.
So there's a roadmap. We're going through the detailed roadmap with execs on Wednesday, and we'll share it more widely. So the test run that we did with the NEDs on Tuesday of this week, I think we've got some really helpful comments from Alison and from Ellen. The team are just kind of playing some of those through, and then what we do is we're rolling that out across the broader committees. So there'll then be a conversation with each of the committee chairs to make sure. At the moment, the way that it's run is it's dynamic, it's on Power BI, so we do need to make sure that we go through with every member of the board to make sure that everyone's comfortable and they can access it. So that's the other part of operationalising, it's making sure we get time with everybody individually.
Yeah, I mean, we had a good presentation, had a good conversation with us. I suppose some of the challenge was about a huge amount of work has gone into that, so we've got to make sure that we use it effectively and that people in the system are using it. So, we've got to keep us updated on it. That's helpful.
I think it would be useful to do a very, I don't know when our next seminar session is, or so it might be useful to tag something like that on to a seminar session to take colleagues through so that you can see where, because what we've done is we've also made sure that where there are metrics, that there are other metrics that are either a cause, a symptom of, we've made sure that we've started to link the metrics right across the piece. So ultimately we'll have that for all committees and also I think for HCIGs as well, to make sure that we can see where we've got implications. There's also another really important piece which is about looking at the implications for quality. So where we've got performance metrics, how the quality implications for our population start to kind of play through. So that's another piece of work that Jane Medhurst and the team are leading.
Okay, thanks, Deb. But Rob, perhaps you can capture that as an action for how we make sure that is either filtered into a seminar session, or we think about how we have that conversation outside of that to make sure we're using it. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Deb. The next one there was around the role of corporate parents. I think this came up the last one, Joe, and I'm not sure you were with us, but it was something about local authority chief execs going away and just whether there's anything else that we didn't cover in the session that you provided for us in Western. Anything else we need to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think we probably should close that action, to be honest, because we've had, we're having individual conversations, I think, with individual organisations.
Okay.
That got delayed a bit because my DCS left, but I'm happy to pick it up and progress it with individual boards now that we've got somebody in role.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. And then we've got 3 more there on the decision-making framework. Those are all going to be covered in the agenda today, I think, aren't they?
No, they're not. That's what's covered in the agenda is risk. People will recall at the last board meeting we had quite a detailed paper looking at the decision-making framework, which was really detailed, layer by layer, trying to make it a framework or a process. The chief executives then, we had an away day. Makes it sound very grand, but we had a long session looking at how we as a system make decisions. And I suppose what came out of it was we've gone down quite what you might call mechanical or systematic approach to decision making. Do A, do B, do C. when actually at the heart of it, we've not agreed what the key principles of decision making are, which actually would make it a lot simpler. So we agreed to take a step back. We did some work. We're drafting what you might call principles of decision making as opposed to a set of mechanics, which chief executives now have the draft version of those. They're going to give me further comment, and we'll bring a paper back to the next board meeting, which is about common sense decision making, as opposed to maybe what we've got into is an industry of flowcharts and God knows what. And only when we agree the principles, then can we look to each organisation and say, okay, does that make sense in your organisation? Do you see any governance challenges, legal challenges, all that kind of stuff? So we went straight to process, but actually we all had a different view of what we mean by decision making and who makes decisions where. So that's where we've gone to, Chair, and we'll bring back something which I hope will then make it much simpler for us as a board to understand where we make decisions.
Thanks, Shane. When's that going to come back to us?
Well, the chief executives are meeting next Thursday, I think is the next meeting. So I would like to bring something in draft form back to the next board meeting, Chair.
Okay, great.
So,
Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions or comments on that before I move us on? Okay, so next item on the agenda is the CEO's update. So, Shane?
thank you, Chair. Colleagues, you all have the paper, so I don't intend to go through it line by line. And as always, I've tried to call out the big things that are in my head as Chief Executive rather than 101 different things. Before I go into the paper, I think it is important in the open meeting to recognise what has gone on in the last 2-3 weeks with regards to Lucy Letby, and in terms of the fallout for that with regards to the impact on families, parents, etc., and also the impact on the NHS and its governance and its professionalism, etc. Now, I think two things are really important to stress. Firstly, Lucy Letby is a serial killer who was also a nurse. Okay, so I think we just need to take time to digest that a little bit before we run off and say what are all the knee-jerk reactions the NHS needs to do. Okay, so I think it's really important to put in the context. However, there is huge learning from what has happened. We yet do not have the facts, data, or any real insight into what did happen in that particular issue. We have what the media has told us, we have what television programs have told us, and we've had, you know, certain insights. But actually, that it's important that we take some time to think, what does it mean for our system? Because clearly there's lots going around about, you know, how do we govern managers? How do we, you know, who's to blame? We've heard that on numerous occasions. You know, the fact that certain people are being blamed already, you know, so we just need to take a bit of a step back. But I think quite clearly it's a moment for us as a system, because we have to understand what is the role of an ICB in trying to keep patients safe in its population. And we will be asking of ourselves, of our partners, how do we assure that we keep patients safe? How do we hear the message and declutter the noise, actually, at this board level? Because there's loads and loads of noise. How do we declutter the noise and hear the message at this board level? So there's work we need to do, Chair. And I don't think we have a meeting today without recognising that. And I know, Rosie, you're going to talk us through some more detail in terms of where we go to next, but I think it's important from a chief executive perspective. And as Jeff had mentioned, we had a large-scale meeting with NHSE yesterday, where all trust chairs and chiefs and all ICB chairs and chiefs were there exploring what does this mean for us now and where we go to. In terms of the report, I've called out 4 things. I'm not going to go into huge detail in any 4, and people can obviously ask any questions about them. I think it is important that the board are very well aware of where we are with our organisational restructuring. It is very clear that we set out to reduce a 30% cost base. We've had a huge amount of work going into that. Thank you to all people. We've had design teams. All of our directors have been in the middle of this, Chair, to really understand what would we have to do to reshape the ICB to meet that kind of cost reduction. We have a really important meeting next week where we bring some of that to our chief executive partners as well, so that chief executive partners can become engaged in that conversation, because there will be a need not just to look inside the organisation but to look across the system. And I think what I would say is you can now see the kind of time frame that we are looking at in terms of trying to get our staff consultation out we're going out with a voluntary redundancy stroke exit scheme, obviously depending on approval from NHSE. I believe 29th September is the date we expect that meeting to be had. And we will be going to the organisation looking for voluntary nominations, voluntary redundancy, and voluntary exit. To deliver this out by the 1st of April is going to require us to meet all of our timelines, but also from an organisational perspective, I can't stress to you as board members the pressure it's putting on within an organisation when people are coming to work every day knowing fine well, in their mind, 3 out of 10 of us aren't going to be here. Now, it doesn't quite equate in that way because it's 30% running costs, not 30% headcount. But if everyone's thinking 3 in 10, we're not going to be here anymore. So I just need the board to understand that the stress and pressure in the organisation, and as much as we will do everything professionally in our ability to make sure the ICB deliver over the next 3 to 6 months, it will be a difficult 3 to 6 months for the organisation as we try to work that through. We must go live, fully live, if this is going to work, by the 1st of April with our new structures. And that's what we really are heading towards. So I just think it's important that this is always on the agenda for this board. But I just want it on record, my thanks to everyone who's in the ICB at the moment, because everyone is giving their absolute all to this, knowing that the organisation will be considerably smaller than it was before we began this process. Other things just to raise: winter preparedness. I think it's important. We haven't met since the winter planning guidance came out, and I just wanted to reflect in terms of the board. You're very well aware of what the NHS winter planning guidance says. You can see quite clearly what's in there in terms of transfer care hubs, in terms of high impact interventions, and later on, well, in fact, today. There's the workshop today with systems partners looking at reflecting on last winter and how do we drive forward to make sure we can deliver a better winter out today. And you can see the kind of things that we need to make sure we deliver well: SDEC, or so same day emergency care, care transfer hubs, etc. So I just think it's important that the board are aware this is our structure for what we're trying to achieve. Workshop today, and we'll be bringing back a winter plan very clearly in terms of what actions we need to take, and that will reflect on this morning's conversation about the procurement of D2A beds, etc. I think the other thing just to note in winter, and I've put it in because I think it is so important, is that winter vaccination. And I just wanted to, this is a public document, so it's important that we call out things important to the public. And you see at the bottom, page 5 of my report, what is happening with vaccination, and it's really important to note that we are bringing it forward. Not just we, BNSSG, we, the NHS, are bringing it forward to make sure we can get both COVID vaccination and, in many cases, COVID and flu vaccination moving much quicker than otherwise would have been the case. And as you can see in there, we're talking about frontline healthcare staff, people over 65, a lot of work going into care homes in the early stage to make sure care home vaccination, and obviously then other people with high risk. Really important. We know the value of vaccination. We know the value that, in fact, one of our biggest public health vehicles we could ever have is vaccination, and therefore it is so important. And obviously our GP colleagues are stepping up to be the vehicle for most of that. It's a huge movement, and I'm very conscious that GP colleagues have stepped forward and have said, right, this is us now, we're going to make this work. Industrial action, Chair, I don't need to go over this in huge detail, but we know what's coming this month. We know what's coming in October. A combination of junior doctor and consultant industrial action. We have had a really robust planning process, and all credit needs to go to the EPRR team, to UHBW, to NB team to deliver what this is. But I think it is really important to put on the table the upcoming industrial action is not the same as the industrial action has been. When a combination of both consultant and junior doctors, the impact is enormous. And secondly, the impact to date on our elective performance is considerable, given the fact that every single time we have industrial action, we lose considerable capacity for elective, which is people not getting their outpatient appointment, not getting their procedure. And therefore this is having a real impact. I think it's important, Chair, in future months we need to start bringing back detailed reporting on harm, to look at the harm that has been caused over the last couple of months so that we can quantify that harm, so we as a board can understand where do we go next to try to make sure that we can correct some of that. And then the final thing I think is important, and I appreciate today also we're reflecting briefly on the annual report, is to bring forward our annual assessment. So as you will see in the paper, NHSE has a legal duty to assess ICBs and how they performed. I've included in the paper in Annex 1 the correspondence that shows how it performed, but I think it's important the paragraph on page 7, which is, this is a direct lift from the letter, as can be seen in the report, NHS England are satisfied the ICB has discharged its duties and met its wider objectives. However, whilst noting there are further opportunities for improvement or future development. So, Chair, clearly you can see in the report what it is in terms of how we have performed in the year, and I'm delighted, and I think it's important to put on record to all of the executive team as well as to the board team the effort that's required in getting a new organisation up and running and making sure that new organisation delivers, which is great. There are opportunities for improvement, and we will use the board, if you so wish, Chair, to bring those back and just to sort of maybe a couple of times this year dip into those, and you can see whether we're delivering on those further opportunities for improvement. But as I say, it's a really good report to read. I think some of the interesting thing towards the end is, and we maybe called a little bit of it out earlier, Joe, in terms of the relationship between the ICP, Health and Wellbeing Boards. I think that's a part, when you look at the document, is have we quite got that right yet? You know, are we really making a connection with health and wellbeing boards, and are we really making a difference in that space? And I think the last section of the document sort of calls that out a bit, so we've probably a bit more work to do. I think we recognise that. I think that's where we've got to go. So, Chair, that for me is sort of the 4 big things, and obviously the Lucy Let. Be happy to take any thoughts, comments or questions.
Okay, thanks, Shane. I think it might be worth saving the conversation around Let Be to the update from Rosie. I'm sure we'll have some comments there, but anything on anyone else on what Shane has updated us on? Ellen?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I particularly like your paper on winter preparedness. I think you've outlined the key areas quite clearly. I just wonder whether you could say a little bit more about the workshop that's going on. I'm mindful of the conversation of challenges of our local authority partners and the key role they play in social care and how that might come together today.
Yeah, I'll just ask Lisa. Lisa's team and actually social care are absolutely around the table today. But
yeah, so all our system partners are meeting today. It's underway at the moment, so I can't give any feedback from what's happening live. Obviously working through core reflections of what happened, what went well last year, what didn't go well, how do we learn from that, making sure that's clear. Being really clear about our bed planning, what our mitigations are, what our surge planning is, in terms of what actions will be taken, what will the triggers be for those. That's underway at the moment, and obviously that will then inform our winter plan, which will go hopefully to system chief execs next week, subject to timing, and then we'll come back through to board in October.
And just on the back of that, and a little bit of understanding perhaps from Joe on workforce and that surge planning and how across the system we're looking in terms of meeting the numbers that we need.
Yeah, so it's in the winter planning preparedness activity. So those conversations are happening as part of that bigger sort of approach. Funnily enough, today just landed in the inbox is the sort of central kind of notification around what will happen around temporary staffing and the potential for incentives in that space. Depend also if we end up with issues around sickness, enhanced sickness, and so on. So yeah, it's all in the planning processes.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Steve.
Just a point on the vaccinations. Clearly, we've been notified of the first batch in terms of vaccinations, and my understanding is that the GPs, pharmacists are engaging with that. Are we just testing ourselves a little bit, given what we've all experienced in the past? We still got access to the workforce that was trained up in extremis to be able to vaccinate in case we need to move faster? Because the reason I'm asking this question, we already know that in primary care there is quite a lot of pressure, so appointments and all of those things are already under pressure. If there is then a move to vaccinate more people, those same practices are going to be under more pressure to engage, and pharmacists similarly are already under pressure. So I'm just asking us, have we got the bank of those that we trained to be vaccinators if we need to call upon them in hand, because we need to be doing that now, not when the balloon goes up.
Geeta updated. Do you want
Would it be
to,
helpful
Lisa
if
and
I-
then Ruth? Yeah.
So I was going to say, I'm sure Ruth will probably say the same thing. So as part of MDT as the MCO, there is a bank of reservist staff that sit as part of that group who were trained as part of that programme, who are being contacted and called up. We also have within organisations individuals who were released as part of that programme, and they are being identified at the moment and thinking about how we can then release them as part of that process. Clearly at the moment the programme is to get up and running and to deliver by the end of October, and we just need to balance that challenge in terms of the pressures that sit within there.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, there's been recruitment for short-term posts ongoing at the moment and recruiting to additional posts, and part of our ongoing planning in the vaccination programme has been about surge, so there's an established surge programme. So I think actually, even though it's a little bit unexpected to have the programme brought forward, it's helpful that it finishes before we truly get into winter, and that will ease the pressures on general practice and community pharmacy.
Okay, thanks Ruth. Steve?
And I declare an interest on this one. With the vaccination hub at UE, we haven't done anything with it yet. So if it is required, it's not timetabled for any other use.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks Steve. Any other questions for Shane? No? Okay, I'll move us on to the annual reports and accounts. They've been presented to you, you've seen them before. This is for public consumption. I would start off by just highlighting some of the fantastic work that's in there, the achievements that have been made in the last year. I mean, Shane has just touched on it, about managing the establishment of a new board, new structures, new organisation, at the same time as improving performance across nearly all of our services, has been quite remarkable. So, Shane, I don't know whether there's anything you'd want to draw out from the report, and then I'll pass to Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people have a copy, or sorry, they have a link to the report. We didn't reprint all of the reports, and obviously we brought both the annual accounts and the annual report to previous meetings. But I think it was just important today to bring the annual assessment together with the annual report, with the annual accounts. I think it is important to reflect that both financially, we ended where we should end in terms of in line with our plans. We have made considerable movement on our unscheduled care activity, so there's no doubt about it. And what I would say, it was said slightly earlier as well, in terms of 4-hour ED performance, for example, we really are at the top of the English league at the moment. And that can always change, but the point is we're starting to move a system, which is great. We're starting to get flow, we're starting to reduce the criteria to reside. But we also know we still have a considerable elective challenge, and we've discussed this before, and particularly some of the challenges with regards to industrial action and cancer, etc. But I think what is really important to reflect, and when you look at the annual report and you look at performance reports, we have moved the dial in many cases. The out-of-area placement work in AWP has moved dramatically. Unscheduled care has moved dramatically. Clearly, we still have challenges, but it is moved, and actually that's as a result of the work that the whole system has put together. So, I mean, the reports are there, and people can look at it. What I would ask you to do, and I'm conscious if we had other members of the press, etc., here would be good. What I would ask you to look at is the mini site we have created. So, in the papers, there's a mini site which brings together videos, stories of all of the things that we have done over the year, and that's online, and you can go in and you can hear from our staff, you can hear from patients, clients, you know, what difference we are making. So, Chair, I'd ask that everyone maybe took 5 or 10 minutes, just took, not now because we're in the board meeting, but took 5 or 10 minutes just to reflect on the mini site and just say, yeah, actually we're moving a system, and that's the reason why ICBs were created to move it. We've got a journey still, but we're moving a system, and that's what we're really trying to do. And I would fully recommend people, if they've got 10 minutes, look at the mini site. If you've got 2 hours, look at the annual accounts, but look at the mini site.
Thanks, Shane. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it was a complicated year because obviously we had 2 different statutory organisations, so we've got there the 2 sets of reports, so both the CCG and the ICB. We obviously have had the external audit of the accounts, which the auditor's statements are in there. At Audit Committee next week, we will also receive that annual audit review, which we'll bring back to board next week, which is a bit broader, that looks at the value for money of the system, which is looking at how we're working. So that will be coming to the board next month. So I didn't really want to add anything else.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Any questions around the annual reports? John?
It's not a question, Chair. It was just to confirm that the Audit and Risk Committee had delegated authority on behalf of the board to review and scrutinise. We did that, and we were happy. We were happy to approve. And I just want to commend the considerable work of the finance team. It's difficult enough in a regular year to land one set of accounts in really good shape, and Sarah and the team did both in a single year, and I think we should just recognise that.
Yeah, thanks, John. John, I think it's a point well made. Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions around item 6.1 then? No? Okay, so I'll move on to the next two items, which Sarah's going to set us off on. One the risk appetite statement, and the second around the risk register for the ICB and for the ICS. It struck me yesterday when we were sat in London to hear Jim Mackey, who is the Chief Operating Officer, the Interim Chief Operating Officer for the NHS, and a Chief Exec from a quite high-performing trust in Northumbria, when he started to talk about managing risk and risk appetite, and that if there's not discomfort in our risk appetite, then we're probably not doing what we should be doing. And so I think just starting this item, if we're going to try and get ourselves to a position where we nail everything down on risk appetite and risk register at the start, we'll never get started. And you can shoot me down on this one, but I just feel we've been appointed as board members for the ICB to try and take health and social care into a different space and to move it forward. And I think unless we're prepared to accept some discomfort in our risk appetite, then we're never going to do that. We're certainly not going to do it at a pace that I think people around this table would want to do. I think in saying that, it's got to be measured, of course. Why wouldn't it be? But I'll let Sarah go into it. But my reading of the risk appetite was just a question of, are we being a bit too cautious to make the progress that I think the public would want us to make? So just a start of a 10.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
Sarah.
Can I just raise one thing before we move on to both of the... No. And it's to support both 6.2 and 6.3, the risk appetite and then our approach to risk. We could go around these papers 27 times, and we've already been around them 3, and never move forward. And actually, there's an element of the greatest risk here of all is not getting on with risk management. Okay, so it's a plea to the board today. In the aim of getting this through, perfection is not the answer here. The answer is let's get started in pointing in the right direction. We've been through these type of papers. This is, I think, the 3rd time. And I'm really asking, this is about getting going, getting in the right direction, not saying we've got this perfectly. Because once we start using it, risk is dynamic, risk is live. Once you start using it, you go, well, that wasn't quite right, we'll change that. But until you start using it, it's useless. It just sits on a paper. So my ask is to come to these with a view that this is about starting in the right direction, not designing perfection before we move.
So I think you've done what you've been asked to do here, Sarah.
Yeah.
And it is worse than herding cats, isn't it? It's a very, very tricky one to get us all in an aligned position around risk appetite and managing risk. But I think this does warrant a conversation about where do we want to position ourselves as an ICB, and if this is it, great, fine. But I think we do need to air that conversation. So do you want to start us off, and I'll open up to
Yeah, that's
questions.
absolutely fine. So what we've done this month is obviously last time we met in July, we had that whole paper that was sort of going through the decision-making framework and everything. So what we've tried to do is to draw out the different elements so that we can hopefully agree some things and move forward, and then we can get on with the other bits. So this first paper is just pulling out those risk appetite statements that we all looked at back in July. I think that there was a sort of consensus at that point that these were okay, but happy to have that debate today. But really what this is about us having a sort of shared view about the amount of risk that we're willing to take to achieve our objectives. So that's the purpose of these, and also to think about where are we going to manage different risks, because what is our risk appetite. We've used the Good Governance Institute work to inform these risk appetite statements. So we did this through a number of workshops to sort of test, and we had more detail in the paper when we met back in July about the range of answers that people had given, and then why we'd gone with the statements that were there. So really, this month I was hoping that we'd sign these off and that we'd then start using them, and then maybe come back in 6 months' time to say, do these still feel right, or do we need to review them again? I think the important bit, though, is also, once we've signed these off, that we really cascade this through our organisations so that people understand what we're prepared to accept and what we're not, and where we're going to manage those different risks, because that's important as well. And when we come on to the next paper, which I thought was going to be the more complicated one, it is complex managing risk in a system. The reason we've been set up is because we cannot resolve the issues that we're facing on our own. And that means we've got to manage risk together, but we've also got to be clear about where accountabilities are, and some of that's going to be really important. So I think I'll stop there, see what the questions are, whether there's an appetite to move this on.
So you've summed that up really well, Sarah, probably much better than the clumsy way I opened it up. But I suppose the question for me is, does what we're presenting today give the platform that Shane has just talked about? If it doesn't, then we haven't got it right. If it does, fantastic. But we do need to be moving forward in that regard. So, comments, questions, observations, Steve, and then
My
Jay.
observations are that all organisations create these things, and we spend a lot of time creating them. And I think we have to be aware that when we get to make decisions in the board, rarely do we go back and reference what we signed off, okay? And the reason for that is very simple, because we're making decisions, the best decisions for that moment in time, to serve the population, or to serve our needs and the needs of our population. So I think that these are guardrails, in my view. Some of the risks, of course, that we're having to manage are way beyond our immediate control. So they fall outside our organisation, although they impact on our organisations. So I think that this is about being pragmatic and saying, okay, where does this sit? But it's not, in my view, personal view, in any organisation I've worked in, it's not the be-all and end-all, because we do have to do exactly what you said, Jeff, and that is we have to make real decisions in real time that benefit those that we serve. And that might challenge us a little bit if we keep referring back all the time. So I think that's where I get with this. Does it give us some broad guidance, but it doesn't tie us down to the point where we freeze and we're unable to move forward.
Okay, thanks,
and
Steve.
as long as the rest of the board is in that place, we're probably okay.
Thanks, Steve. Jay.
Just question about whether or not we were aware of the risk levels with the CCG approach, and are we? My view has been with the ICS, the shift to the ICS is an expression of seeking level 4. We have to do things differently, so it does make me wonder whether or not we have got the level of openness to be able to push it as far as we need to. The open is but for people at least, it's the lowest level setting and not the only level setting, that we should be prepared to push upwards if we need to, and have freedom to do that where we judge that it's necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jay. John.
Thanks, Jay. I think I'm in the same place really as Steve. We have been talking about this for quite some time. It's something that the internal auditors have picked up on in their annual report, and I think that if we were trying to nail this down as an absolute fix, I would be more uncomfortable. But I think the fact is that we've got the review process built in. I know in the next paper we talk about quarterly reviews and so on, but I think that this just needs to be a dynamic process, and I think that this is a good place to start. And I think, as Steve has already said we are already effectively doing this. We're making decisions, particularly around commissioning, around investment decisions, particularly in Fed. So I think that we are already, I think we're already living this. So I would favour running with it, and let's have a review and have an initial light touch look in 3 to 6 months, and just keep it under review that way.
Okay, thanks, John. Joe?
Yeah, I'm in a similar place. I think we do need a robust kind of risk framework to operate as a board. And I've had the benefits, along with colleagues who've been on the audit committee and seen this beforehand. I guess I would want to reiterate a point I made there, which was that, just to note, I suppose, that different parts of the system will have different risk appetites, and we all have our own organisational risk frameworks. And that's, for those of us working in political environments, that will be also impacted by not just views of residents, but, the politics, but also funding, etc. So, but as I'm reading this is a framework for us to operate as a board within. And the fact that it is dynamic, and all risk frameworks and risk registers should be dynamic, I think is positive. So, yeah, supportive.
Thanks, Joe. Alison?
Support getting on with this rather than going around it again. Really like the review period, because things might come in. I guess when I look at the recommendations and it's about board members cascading it through their organisations, cascading it through everything else. As a board, what would we see if all of that was successful? If it's cascaded through partner organisations, what will we see as success? What's the outcome that we'll see here? Because I think that's the bit that I'm more interested in, is the so what bit. So if the recommendations are implemented about cascade, what does that mean for us?
I guess some of what we're trying to achieve is that it's not just around this table that we're working in partnership and able to make decisions, in line with those risk appetites, but actually in the sort of the various bits of our infrastructure that we've set up to support us. So whether that's in the health and care improvement groups or operational delivery groups, for example. So it's really making sure that all of our teams understand that's the sort of framework we've given, and also to make sure that we're getting things appropriately escalated to us where they're outside of those risk appetite statements, so that we do get the right level of visibility here. So I guess those are the sorts of things I would think, Alison.
The idea of cascading to our partners is not so they apply it in their organisation, because every partner has it, but they apply it in their mind when they come to system working.
Yeah.
So they don't, when they come to the health and care improvement group, or they come to the operational delivery group on X, Y and Z, they understand that's the framework that group works in, as opposed to not necessarily the framework of their individual organisation. Because actually we don't want them to play this in their own organisation. That's not our job. And in fact we shouldn't do that. But it is when they come to the system. So maybe we need to think about the way we cascade it, so people appreciate that when they come to a regional or a system group, this is the lens we're using.
I think that's why I asked the question.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
it's really
what does
helpful.
success look like? I think if it is channeling to the health and care improvement groups and everything else, reviewing their effectiveness after a period of time will be one of the ways that we can check if it's successful or not. Because I just fear it will sign this off, and I don't know how it makes a difference in practice. So if there's a way that we can review its effectiveness, that would be, without it being an industry, that would be quite helpful, I think.
Sarah, any views?
I think maybe we just pick that up, because I think we'll want to look at the effectiveness of health and care improvement groups after a period, and if we incorporate it into that, then. Yeah.
Okay, Joe?
Just thinking of the latter point, actually, I think one way of doing that is ensuring that there is a risk register for each of the H6, and that we embody it that way, and then you start to live risk, don't you, in reality. But just going back to, I absolutely agree with you, Shane. I was thinking the same thing. We need to be careful in how we message this, about that organisational versus system difference. And also, I suppose, certainly as a local authority board member, but I'm pretty sure my other two equivalents would agree, it would only be to proportion of my organisation, so the cascading won't be to the whole organisation, which is implied here, so just being frank.
Thanks, Joe. Any other comments or questions? So we're being asked to agree the position on both the risk appetites and the risk register and development. I think Sarah's given us put a lot of hard work into this, and I think you've summarised it really well, Sarah, about how we'll take it forward. But it is important to us. It does give us a framework to operate as a board. So Is there anything anyone would disagree with before we move to agree the position? No. Okay, great. Thanks very much. So we'll move on to the reflections on the...
It's the next one.
Oh, sorry.
And then the risk registers. As
Yeah.
the first one was the appetite.
Right,
making
sorry,
sure we
sorry.
agree. And now we move to the registers paper.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, so this is the one which I thought might be a bit more complex. Just because it is complex because of the type of, although we're a statutory organisation, we also have responsibility for the system. And so we've got to both be thinking about the risk management for our statutory organisation, but also for the system. So in line with the paper that came back in July, we agreed that there'd be sort of two elements to that. So the ICB corporate risk register, both operational and strategic, and then the ICS risk register, both operational and strategic. So if we just keep those 4 elements in mind, I think that helps. So you'll remember we signed off previously a definition of what a system risk is, which is a risk held in common between health and/or care partner organisations which cannot be controlled or mitigated by sovereign partners in isolation. So we've all got responsibility to try and identify those and then bring them to the table and then make sure we're clear in terms of how we're going to mitigate them and be clear about who's doing what in that mitigation, because that is going to be important that we can, you know, make sure we're on top of that between us. So if I just take those 4 different elements as in turn. So I think that the ICB corporate risk register, I'm hoping that's relatively straightforward, and you've got sort of the latest version of that in your papers. So basically want to just make sure that people are comfortable with that and the way that we're presenting that. In terms of the ICB strategic risks, I think we haven't really yet properly looked at the strategy and then what does that mean for the ICB as an organisation, different to us as a collective, but us as an organisation in terms of what are the risks associated with that. So the recommendation would be that the ICB exec team do that and bring that back to our board meeting in December. Then moving on to the ICS risk register, we have in Appendix 2, Rob's actually done this work, so pulled out an illustrative sort of risk register that we'd want to use. And I think what we'd like is your feedback is that, does that look okay in terms of the format? But we'd then take that through the ICS Partner Risk Managers Network to have discussion there and to get that populated from information that's contained on everybody's risk registers, because we know that there will be on everybody's risk registers things that meet that definition of system risk, but we need all of those, that risk management network to pull those out. And then moving on to the next bit, it's then this bit about once we've identified all of those risks, being clear about where we're managing those. And Joe, your point about the HSIGs having room on their meetings to really look at those risks, I think that is absolutely part of what we'd be recommending here, because I think that is going to be the place where we're able to identify and manage, but escalate the ones that go across health and care improvement groups, because there will be many of those as well. And then in terms of the ICS strategic risks, you'll remember that we, in January, we had a seminar looking at the strategic risks, and the strategic risks that we identified then are summarised in the paper. I think now that we've got the strategy, I think it would be just what I think is that actually looking at the range of risks that we identified, they still feel very relevant. But what might be good is for us to actually do some work to go, and I'm happy to take this action. It's not quite what we've worded in the paper, but actually to go through those, think about where would those be best sat in terms of the accountability, and take that first to the system executive group for discussion and then bring it back to the board afterwards. So if you're happy with that, that's what I'd like to do in terms of taking that forward. And then if we're content with what we've just described there, that we need to update the ICB risk management policy to reflect that. So all of those recommendations are then set out in a sort of table in section 7, but really happy to take questions.
Okay, open to questions, observations. Sue?
Yeah, my only comment on this register, I think it's really good. We've got movement of current risk on there. I guess there's something about whether or not we want over a period of say 3 months to be able to track how the risk has moved, because otherwise you only get the prime. I can see you've got the date that the risk was first put on there, but it's that kind of how it tracks would be my only observation.
So more of a sort of time series.
Yeah, so you've got kind of previous quarter almost, or
Yeah.
Joe?
You can do it through direction of travel with arrows. That's another way of doing it that's a lot easier bluntly than looking at another column of figures. I just wanted to check, have you got all organisations represented in terms of risk partners?
I think it's fair to say it's coming together.
Okay.
So
escalated you need to.
Thank you.
Okay. John?
Thanks. Two points from me. I had the same thought, Sarah, about the strategy, and it was just kind of amplified by Colin's points earlier about the shared story and how risk might potentially feed into that. The other point was really just to say that Sarah and I are currently working on arranging a get-together for audit chairs across the patch, where we would look to socialise and kind of test this a little more and try and move the discussion on around how the system risk works, and the impacts on in terms of what's happening within sovereign organisations. So that's happening too in the background.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Ellen, Rosie, and then Dominic.
Sarah, just confidence level in you. You seem to be all over this, so that sort of shows me that you're sort of driving us in the right direction.
A lot of support from Ellie.
I'm sure. What would be, I think, helpful in the future when we arrive there, because I'm mindful, as a committee chair, we've not had a good go at the risk register for our particular areas, and I think we've been waiting for this piece of work. It would be really good to understand what the HCIGs are going to be doing, what the committees are going to be looking at, so that we're not duplicating effort, but making sure that we're not, it's not presented, eyes glaze over and people don't engage. So I'm really, really keen that we engage with risk.
Thanks, Ellen. Rosie?
So in the system quality group we have a risk and intelligence log which contains some of our higher clinical risk, and I think probably Rob, you and I should sit together, or somebody in my team should sit with you and do a compare and contrast. We don't try and rate them on SQG in the same way that we do in a risk register. We also just have to think about how those two correlate. So you might miss some high risk areas that we're working on as health and care leaders off the risk register, which have already been reported through to the regional quality group. So something about how do we have those running alongside each other, even if they can't be fully integrated.
Dominic?
So mine is more an architectural piece, and it might be I've missed something in earlier meetings or not remembered it. I'm more used to you have your board assurance framework, and then you have your bottom-up organisational risk register. And I'd have thought a similar discipline applies to the ICB. But here we seem to be unclear about what the difference between the two things is.
I think that the way we arrived at that, Dominic, is that we've sort of, almost we are doing that in terms of having both operational risks and strategic risks. So the strategic risks are like the board assurance framework, but there isn't a board assurance framework, for example, in our local authorities. So it was a language thing, so that we understand what we're talking about across the system.
Okay.
But it's not dissimilar to that approach.
Okay. So if that's a conscious, if you like, deviation from the norm, we should state that that's a conscious deviation from the norm. In case somebody comes in and assesses and says, you're not doing the bloody thing you're supposed to, say, yes, but...
Okay.
And that then fits with what I was saying about the SQG risk log, is that also is done in a slightly different way, in line with the MQB guidance. So we do have a set of things running in parallel to accommodate different ways of working.
So there might be a little bit of policy writing we need to do. So having considered what is normal practice. We've decided to do the following. So it's
And
really, really
I would
clear.
suggest that we incorporate that into the risk policy
Yeah.
once if we're happy that we're agreeing this, so that it is really clear. Thank
Sounds
you.
sensible. Eugene.
Thank you, Chair. A plea more than anything else. So when risk managers get together,
We know where this is going.
we need the right level of risk, not a collection of risks.
No, no.
And I think there's something implicit in what we're doing, which is risk is delegated appropriately
Exactly.
to where it's managed within the system.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we would have is an oversight and assurance that we've got the mechanisms and systems of control in partner organisations to manage system risk, as opposed to we're going to have a spreadsheet that sort of brings together everyone's risks, because that would be a nightmare and would achieve very
It's not
little.
what we're trying to get to, Eugene, I absolutely assure you. Yeah.
And I think that's reflected in our conversations
Oh,
at the start. isn't it?
beyond belief.
Yeah.
System risk is not adding everyone's risk together.
No.
And that's where we started from. System risk is about what's the system trying to achieve and what are the risks. If we just add everyone's risk together, we just duplicated but not added any value.
Okay, thanks. Any, Sue?
Yeah, the first question of any risk managers coming together is whose risk is this? And I think that's just the, it's a strategic risk is the only risk that will be here rather than operational in that sense.
I think there may be some, though, where we have to recognise that there may be operational risks that because they become bigger than the organisation or they require action by other parts of the system, that we do need to have oversight of those. So, but it is,
But that's
we're
a
expecting that to be a
strategic
few.
risk of not delivering a performance outcome rather than our risk, because we can't control that, can we?
I think it's back to that definition of what is a system risk, and we have to keep going back round that, and I know it is challenging, but it's a risk that we're holding in common. So,
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff like the urgent care performance, I think that the conversation we had earlier actually really showed that is a system risk, because it's not in the gift of one single sovereign organisation to resolve it on their own. So, but there will be operational elements to that we need to manage.
Sue, you don't look
Sue.
satisfied.
Well, because when you start talking about accountability,
Yeah.
we're not accountable as a board for UEC, as in the delivery of operationally. And I don't think it's for here, absolutely not, because this goes back to PhD kind of world. So, but I do think it's really important that we just keep coming back to whose risk is this, and what is, because if we can't mitigate it as a board, it's not our risk.
And I think it might be that it is our risk, but we need to, but what the mitigations are, I think that's where we've got to be really clear about who owns which elements of the mitigation, because we may be relying on 3 different organisations to provide the mitigations. That one might be 50% of the mitigation, that might be another 30, and that might be 20, and we need to have oversight of all of them to make sure that we really are addressing that risk.
There's risk in addressing the risk.
Yeah. So you can see why this is tricky.
Yeah, well it is tricky because you get a greater clarity around your individual responsibilities, accountabilities of your organisation. But when we start to look at a wider issue and you apply it to all of us, that becomes harder. So that we all carry elements of the risk, don't we? And we all carry different parts of the accountability, or maybe none, or maybe huge amounts. It is hugely complex, isn't it? We're never going to box this, are we? I just don't think we'll just go around in circles. So I think where we've got to is probably a good place. But I do think we have to reflect that conversation, which is, so who's accountable for what in this?
And
so that it doesn't just slide through the cracks.
And that's why I'd really like to get this into operation, for us to test it and then come back and say, right, is that working now?
That's often the only way you
Absolutely.
can do this is to actually start it.
Okay, any other points or questions? So there's 12 recommendations there that Sarah's put in the paper. She's run through them all in the conversation. Is there anything on any of those people wouldn't be happy to support at this stage, accepting that we will come back and review it? No? Okay, thanks very much. I will move on to the item then, which is the reflections on the impact of the verdict of the Letby trial. Rosie, you're going to start us off on this, I think.
Thank you. And I mean, Shane's already framed this really eloquently earlier today, and it's really important we reflect on the fact that our actual knowledge of the facts of this is quite limited to what's in the media. And as Shane said, this is a person who's a serial killer, who was a nurse, and getting that in the right order and reflecting on that. Having said that, obviously we can't wait until we do get the full facts of the independent inquiry to take some action ourselves. And it's really striking that some of the features that come out of this have come out of previous patient safety issues in relation to actually listening and hearing properly from the people that use our services and our workforce. And as I said, we don't know the facts yet, but that is the sense that we get as we have another situation where people were trying to raise concern, either parents of the children or our workforce, and that wasn't heard effectively and wasn't acted on. So there is work we will need to do collectively and individually inside our organisations to really think about our own culture and our own freedom to speak up systems to make sure they're really, really working in service of the safety of our citizens and our workforce. We also need to acknowledge as well that things have changed a lot since the time in which Lucy Letby was committing those crimes, and we have our LMNS, which is routinely scrutinising all the maternity and neonatal outcomes. And I think it unlikely that we wouldn't see a spike in that now. Every single maternal death, every single neonatal death is looked at, and we look at that through our Quality Safety Committee and through the LMNS. But we also need to be mindful this isn't really about maternity either. This is about, you know, a member of workforce who was committing hideous crimes. So we need to think about that in our broader context and not lean into any one particular clinical area. As mentioned in the paper, we have our patient safety incident response framework going into place. And we need to reflect on that, how that will help us, but also how it might also create a different view and make sure we're not creating unexpected blind spots. So for the time being, I think what's important is we take this away and reflect upon it. I will be discussing it regularly with Chief Nurses. Sue's leading conversations with us at Region about how Chief Nurses across the South West will be responding, and it'll be a subject of much conversation over the coming weeks and months. And we will discuss it at our System Quality Group later this month. I had planned this month to bring a seminar session for us to discuss safety culture, and how we as a board understand that as a system. But given the events that have happened just before this board, the Chief Nurses and I agreed it would be better to take some time to reflect upon that. And then the plan is to come in the autumn as a team of Chief Nurses and other healthcare professionals to lead a seminar conversation about different to inside the organisations, but how do we as a system board push and look in the right places? How do we ask the right questions at a system level? So we'll bring that back, as well as anything we pull out of the System Quality Group. But I think the messages are really important. This is about our culture. This is about us hearing and listening properly and acting quickly. And as Sue said to me earlier, being prepared to believe the unbelievable.
Yeah.
Sue, did you have anything else you wanted to add from the national conversations?
Really good summary, thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
I mean, just my reflections as a former police officer, repeatedly you see the unbelievable when you look at an investigation. One of the points that the chair of the NHS Confederation made yesterday was a point you just made there, Rosie, which is don't put all the solutions in place that you think need to be there until you've established the facts, because you don't know where things went wrong. You do know you had a mass murderer who has killed babies. You know, it's a horrendous set of circumstances. We know that. We don't know all the elements of the investigation yet, and we should try. You know, we should look at those. The first question I asked Shane the next day after the verdict was, how do we get assurance and ask the right questions to make sure that the flow of information and on decision making through our organisations is getting the right level of scrutiny and challenge? And I just reflected on it. If I was in a quality committee and we get presented the data of, it could be anything. It could be pressure sores, it could be childhood, it could be anything. And it comes outside of what would be statistically the norm. And one of the non-exec directors says to the chief medical officer or to the chief nurse, can you explain to us why that is outside the norm? And they get very coherent explanation by the chief nurse or the chief medical officer, and this is a challenge for the Neds in the room really, at what point do you say, I accept that, I believe it, thank you very much, that's reassured me, or do you say, I think we need to have a look at that in a bit more detail, we need to do a bit of a review, because you know, it's quite a difficult thing to do, to challenge your chief medical officer and chief nursing officer, particularly if you haven't got the clinical experience yourself. But at what point does the NED say, I don't feel happy? So how do they check that out with others? How do they do that themselves? Because we do need to work together as a team. And I think on this is, if the right questions are asked in the right time, it gives us a better chance. Because with all of these, we seem to have seen that the board feel like they're carrying out their responsibilities, yet they're missing huge amounts of what's happening within the delivery of services. So on the face of it, it looks like we're operating in the right way, but we're not. So that was the thing I think we probably need to just be sure on, because I think different boards operate in different ways, and it is really dependent on the relationship of board members that you are able to say, I disagree, without your professionals feeling absolutely affronted that you dared to ask them that question. Because this is about the safety of the public and babies in this case, which it's awful, isn't it? So just some reactions. We will see over a period of time that there will be an awful lot that comes out from NHSE and other parties that we will be expected to respond to, and rightly so. But I think we can make sure that we do things for ourselves to give us that greater reassurance.
I'll show you the scope, just responding to that, and check it through with you, Jeff, because I think we should be covering that in the seminar session. And actually, I think most people like me would say we want the challenge from our non-execs, because actually, you know, even though you've got many years of clinical professional experience, that sometimes you are also very close. And so what you need from your non-exec is that pushback, is that have you looked at it from that angle or that angle? So actually making sure we've got the confidence to do that check and challenge with each other is safety netting, which would be welcome, I think.
And there's a delicate balance in this, because, you know, I'm not saying to the Neds, you need to just not listen to anything that's being said to you. But when the chief nurse rolls their eyes when you've asked that question, do you just sit back and shut up? Or do you say, hang on, Rossi, can you just answer me that again? Because we've all, I guess all of us who've got non-exec experience have been sat in that position where you've had that look on your face from an exec member, which is, you don't know what you're talking about. But actually, what is a simple, and today you've heard it, some of those simple questions are the ones that draw out the biggest challenge. So I suppose I'm just throwing the challenge back in, particularly to our chairs of our committees on this. Eugene, so there's plenty. Eugene, Maria, and then Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I'll push back slightly on that one, because we're all accountable. And challenge shouldn't just come from the non-executives, actually.
Yeah, I agree, sorry. Yeah.
Because that culture is
but that's what we're appointed
differential.
To do. Yeah.
And we've got to have a healthy approach to being inquisitive and asking the questions in all directions. The one thing that I also wanted us to reflect on is hindsight bias, which is in part what's playing out in many boards today, where without all the evidence, of course this wouldn't happen here. Yeah. It could happen anywhere. It would absolutely happen anywhere. And I guess the real challenge is to ensure that as we do the necessary work around our governance processes, our culture, ensuring that not only people are encouraged to speak up, but we listen, that there is something about fighting tooth and nail to avoid any fissures in exec, non-exec, clinicians, managers, or whatever tribes that people feel they have to defend, because like anything else that is shameful, that is awful, it has no parents. So we want to outsource it, but part of having a safety culture that is right is leaning into the problem collectively, because that's how we manage complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. Point well made. Thanks, Eugene. Maria.
Yeah, I think something that was said yesterday about sometimes you don't
see the signal because the noise around it is too much. And I suppose I'm just thinking back to our conversation on risk management. You know, you can, well, that can't have happened. It wasn't on the risk register. You know, where are we taking our assurances from? And something about curiosity and sensing. There is no replacement for that. Going, this feels funny. So I suppose a kind of expectation of us all on the board that we're going into those areas that we might feel some discomfort around, or things aren't quite adding up. And, you know, yes, we have all done that. You know, oh God, Ned's asking another question again. And now I think this is a new era of being able to say, thank goodness for that. That would, you know, our own hindsight bias or confirmation bias, we see what we want to see. And it stops us after a while. We habituate, and we're not going to see these things. Which I suppose makes me think the other conversation was about, we jump on things when they've happened, but are we looking at our near misses and going, wow, look at the learning we could have gone, how we avoided that, how that translates. And then perhaps getting ahead of the game. You know, there's a discussion about Martha's Law at the moment, and access to a second opinion. You know, perhaps that might be something we'd like to say in BNSSG.
Yeah.
We'd really like to be able to offer that. That is our unique offering to patients and our population here. So just some points.
Thanks, Mia. That's great. Alison.
I think there's so many layers to this, aren't there? But I think each partner will do their own reflections inside their organisations of what they do know and what they can assume. And I think there'll be some really good practice that we could share across, because I just think there will be. I think the patient safety framework coming in would be helpful because it's a cultural shift. But I guess a plea would be, this isn't about clinical staff only. This is about anybody who works in any organisation being able to raise concerns. And so if the chief nurses are the SROs, that's great, but it doesn't sit in a nursing box. It sits in an organisational box. And I guess if I was an exec and a NED kept asking me, I don't think I've rolled my eyes at NEDs before, but I'm not explaining it well enough. And if you can't explain it to someone who's not immersed in your world, you've got the issue. So whenever, and even if you are immersed in the world, people can get very technical and they can go, particularly around mortality rates, blah, blah, blah. But if you can't explain it to someone who doesn't know it, you're not doing your job properly. So I think they do need to take time, execs, to make sure that when they say it, it makes sense to people, not in a tribe. So I think that's quite important.
And that the ability to dig below the surface sometimes, just to triangulate what you're being told, is really important, isn't it, Shane?
Yeah, just a bit of a reflection on yesterday, but also on the board. I think we're really careful. We are a system board. We're not a provider board.
Yeah.
And we've got to be really careful on what's the learning for a system and what we implement. The last thing this board needs to do is go into the stuff that our provider board should be doing. And it was interesting, just yesterday's workshop, and I was at a table with a few other people, and somebody says, well, ICB is just confusing things. You know, we don't need this other layer. And I thought, what do you mean? And it was nearly as if to say, well, by the fact you've got this, we are now not responsible for this. And I was like, whoa, no, you are. And I think it's really important that we try to make sure this board doesn't become the place that we all get under the skin. We have to assume providers are getting under the skin because that's what they do. They've got chairs, they've got boards, they've got committees. And therefore, what's the unique place of a system board in patient safety? And we haven't answered that question yet, but we've got to do that, because the last thing I want to be doing is crawling all over what Eugene you should be doing, because that's just pointless. So what's the unique role an ICB board can bring to patient safety? And I think that's the question we have to ask, yeah.
So it's a good question. Have you got any answers or
No, I was thinking on the train going home. I was trying to get some time on the train home, but then you sat next to me and I couldn't think. But
I wasn't talking to you.
It's true, you weren't actually. But actually, I don't know what the answer is. But if we don't find that unique sweet spot, we will just be duplicating, which doesn't add the safety.
And we've talked about that on everything, haven't we? Which is, this board should not be trying to duplicate the effort of our constituent organisations, because it actually becomes pointless.
Yeah.
But
So-
sharing
so, yeah.
data and knowledge is where we're
Yeah.
at as a system, and so if we do have movements of potential serial killers between our system parts, then that's probably where the conversation starts.
But
So
the
I
other
think
thing, I'm going to bring Steve and John in a sec, but the other thing yesterday, the dominant conversation was also about culture.
Yeah, yeah.
And we in this room are the most senior leaders in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucester in public services. There's others who are also part of that, who aren't here today, but we got the lion's share in this room. If we don't model the right tone and culture, then what follows on from that is well, we could guess. But Steve and John.
Thanks. So I'm going to say what this isn't the first time there have been these sorts of court cases and then learning that flows out from them. So as we're looking at whatever comes out of this one, let's reflect back just to make sure that we haven't lost the learning from the previous ones. Bad people are out there, bad people make bad things happen, but we can learn. So I think our role as an ICB and as a system is to make sure that we're continually learning and sharing, because for me that's often the thing that's been missing. One organisation has an incident, investigates it, and in this case clearly it was a court case, and there's a lot of learning that comes from it. We used to see exactly the same thing in mental health homicides, where I would chair those meetings where everybody would say we would learn from the lessons, and yet every time I was seeing the same thing over and over and over again. So we're not learning as a system, and I think that's where we come in. How do we make sure that the system is learning from each other and not assuming, well, that was that organisation, it will never happen in mine. When we get to that point, then we will be a truly reflecting system, and a system that can support itself.
Yeah, and interesting, having done that job as well, the finding is generally we don't communicate.
Exactly. Yeah.
And repeat.
We don't share, we don't
share, we don't communicate across organisations. So here's the real opportunity we've got here. Thanks, Steve. John?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm not trying to get into sort of provider or business or anything like that. I'm just interested to know how people in the profession are feeling, kind of what the sense is that you are hearing from people who have seen the profession sort of compromised, potentially damaged. Just interested to know how people are feeling across the patch, and whether it's change behaviour, whether people are being more risk averse or whatever.
Yeah, clearly I think the messages that have been reiterated today, that this was a serial killer or a mass murderer, not just a nurse, are really important, because I think immediately the spotlight came on nursing, which again everybody takes a bit of a step back. What could we have done as a profession? How we as a profession? I think that's gone really quiet very quickly, which I'm really grateful for. But it doesn't stop every single individual thinking, oh my goodness, could that have happened on my shift, in my service, in my organisation? So I think generally it's been, how can we as a profession regain confidence? Because immediately what happens is a lot of the public feel they're not safe in any organisation. So that's one aspect. And the other one is, why is it always nursing that gets the spotlight? There are other people implicated in this, and yet it was the nurse director that was. So again, speculation on media fuels professional response that is unhelpful often. I think generally it's shock, disbelief, but also a re-looking at how could we protect within our own environment.
Yeah, I think same as Sue, but I think also, and I think you covered it as well, so profound sadness and sorrow for everybody involved in that, but also deep reflection in terms of, as you said, in terms of, rather than it couldn't happen here, I think we all have to start from the place of, as providers, it could happen here, because, having come from a criminal justice background as well originally, people that are intent on committing crime will find them ways into the types of organisational settings that allow them to do that. And I think certainly, you know, from a community perspective, it's thinking about how do you manage and mitigate the potential for that, where you don't have eyes on people all the time, when you're not operating within a setting where there's lots of people and there's greater opportunity for one-on-one type interaction. So I think everybody's very much in that reflective space, and wanting to make sure that we learn lessons from the very awful circumstances that have happened there.
Thanks, Sue. Dominic?
So just very briefly, as a bill on both of those, we had exactly this discussion in my executive team, and there's obviously the murders themselves in the trial, which is deeply shocking, upsetting, almost beyond comprehension. But then there's the media coverage, and then there's how we react to the media coverage. And the very strong feeling from my team is we cannot let this pit medics against nurses, nurses against medics, medics and nurses against managers, managers. That's on us. You know, the media coverage is on them. What Lucy did is on her. How we react is on us, and that we